You're listening to Captain's Logs and Lightsabers, part of the Geek News Now podcast network.
Hey, welcome to Captain's Logs and Lightsabers. We are the podcast on the Geek News Now network that discusses both Star Trek and Star Wars at the same time. I am but one of the hosts. My name is Jonathan. Let me introduce my co-host who is here every single episode with me, Chris. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good there, Jonathan. How you doing there, sir?
I'm doing great. This is my favorite month of the year. It's October. It's spooky season. And, as you could probably tell by our intro this week, this is a little different than what we typically do. This episode should be hitting your feeds on Halloween. So I'm going to let Chris kind of take over here because he had an idea for this episode and I thought it was incredible. So I'm going to let him explain what we're doing and why.
All right, well, thank you. So basically, my idea for this episode came from the fact that it's Halloween season, obviously. I have a small YouTube channel that I do called Pittsburgh's Trek Chat, in which I talk about different Star Trek things that are going on. And I'm planning to do a Halloween episode for that. And I was thinking of doing the 10 most freakish and grotesque moments in Star Trek. And as I was putting my list together, I said to myself, you know what? This might be a lot of fun to talk about on Captain's Logs and Lightsabers. Do a little Halloween episode. So what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of 10 moments from Star Trek, we're going to divide it in half. So we're going to do 5 grotesque moments from Star Trek and 5 grotesque moments from Star Wars. And so hopefully everybody has their little barf bags next to them. Get ready for some of the gross out here.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if we have to go that far, but,
I'm trying to make it sound ghoulish for Halloween.
Either way, strap in. This is going to be a different one. So, Chris, why don't you kick us off with the number 5 grotesque moment from Star Trek?
All right. So one of my favorite episodes from The Next Generation season 7 was Genesis. It was the episode where Barclay had some sort of virus and Dr. Crusher gave him some sort of norovirus or something, whatever it was called, to counteract it. But what it did was it caused the crew to de-evolve into different creatures from their home worlds. Some of the creatures that they de-evolved into they're pretty basic. Like Commander Riker was like a Neanderthal, something like that. Nurse Ogawa was a chimpanzee. So those didn't look really grotesque, but there were a couple freaky ones in there. If you remember, Counselor Troy started to de-evolve into some sort of frog or some sort of amphibian. And so her makeup required her to have these big-ass sets of gills or something around her neck, and her fingers and toes were kind of webbed and kind of sticky looking. That was kind of freaky looking. Let's see, what else did we have here? If anybody remembers, Lieutenant Barclay de-evolved into an arachnid. In his makeup, they had about 10 different eyeballs, on one side glued to his face, and he had these weird looking kind of claw kind of things when he was pounding on the windows in engineering. Can't remember if he was doing something weird with his tongue or not, but I kind of think that he was. Can't remember, but it was really kind of freaky. He was using those kind of claws or whatever that were stuck to his legs. He was pounding on the windows. That looked kind of weird. Just like his hair looked like it was falling out and being kind of sparse. So that was kind of creepy and grotesque looking. And then the one that really looked grotesque was Worf. If you guys remember in that episode, Worf kind of de-evolved into some sort of proto-Klingon. And he was just really big and grotesque in stature. And let's see, what else was he? He had these really like Neanderthal looking kind of cranial ridges that he had, and these weird, odd little teeth that were sticking out of his mouth. And when he was running through the halls, he was kind of running almost like a gorilla, kind of with his arms down, hands up, through the darkness, which was really cool. So I thought that episode was neat because even though it wasn't meant to be a grotesque episode, it had some really grotesque looking kind of images in it with the makeup, and they did a really nice job with that. One other part of the episode that really freaked me out, and it really wasn't a big makeup moment, but it was when Worf was starting to find out that he was de-evolving, and Dr. Crusher was in sickbay with him and found these pus sacs underneath his neck. And she said, "Worf, open your mouth." And then there was silence, and all of a sudden he hissed, and all this venom went into her face. That was freaky shit, man. It really was. Not what, even to this day, it still gives me the chills. I always wait for that moment. It's like in the Rocky Horror Picture Show when Dr. Frankenfurter saying Antissa, and then you have to wait, and then he says patient or patient. That's what it reminds me of in that moment, because you just have to wait for that moment to happen, you know?
Right.
So have you remember that episode? You remember watching it?
It has been a very long time since I've watched through TNG, and that episode doesn't really stand out to me. But now that you've kind of refreshed my memory about it, I think I might have to go check it out.
Yeah, definitely go on Paramount Plus and check it out, or if you have it on physical media, definitely do it. It's worth a rewatch. It's spooky, and it's something different that Star Trek never really did before. So a real good one.
All right. So I guess it's time for my number 5 scary moment from Star Wars. We're going to start this one off a little less freaky than Chris's number 5 here. But for me, growing up, one of the scariest scenes in the original trilogy was the dark side cave on Dagobah in Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. You know, Luke and Yoda are having that conversation about the dark side as Yoda is training him, and they're running through the swamps and everything. And then, of course, they stumble on the cave that is just emanating with the dark side and evil. You get that music that builds that tension and the foreboding as Luke kind of crawls through the cave, through those tight, enclosed passages with the webs and everything. When he finally is able to stand totally upright, he looks in the distance and he sees Vader coming for him, menacing, lighting up the lightsaber. And then I don't know if it was, I'm sure this was absolutely intentional, but how the frame rate of the lightsaber battle between Luke and Vader is intentionally slowed down so that it looks like it's very surreal and dreamlike. And then, Luke is able to get the better of Vader and cut off his head, and the head the head inside the helmet rolls to the ground, and then it just explodes, and Luke is staring at his own face. Man, that just creeped me out as a kid.
I can see why. I see an exploding helmet with a face in there. I'm sure that would be pretty freaky deaky.
So that's my number 5. How about your number 4 Trek moment?
My number 4 Trek moment goes to, let's see here, an episode of Voyager called Threshold. Now, this one is kind of an odd one to talk about. Threshold is basically known for the fact that Tom Paris and Captain Janeway they called it evolving in the episode, but they actually de-evolved, it looked like, into salamanders and ended up having babies. So that's a big thing in the Star Trek fandom, is that episode being joked about, them having the babies and being left on the planet. But
that one definitely gets a lot of hate.
Yes, it certainly does, but it gets a lot of love too. Actually, somebody just posted online on Twitter recently. They crocheted one of the salamander creatures. Wait a minute. Or no. It was in I think an episode of Lower Decks. Oh shit, I can't remember. I just saw it on here just a day or two ago. It might have been an Easter egg in Lower Decks that somebody put in there. Oh, I know where it was from. That new Star Trek Prodigy video game. I think it was an Easter egg in Admiral Janeway's quarters.
Wait, there's a Star Trek Prodigy video game? How did I not know about this?
Apparently, it just came out. Star Trek Prodigy Supernova, I think is what it's called. So, yeah, check it out and see it, if that's something you want to add to your video games. But I think that's what it was an Easter egg in the video game that somebody made. So
that's great.
Yeah, it was wild. But it's not even the salamanders that are the gross part of the episode. It's the episode as Tom is starting to evolve and he's losing his human qualities. It starts out with these just tiny little veins popping out of his head by his temples, and then it spreads to he's losing his hair, and then his facial colors are starting to change. And then at one point, the grossest part of the episode is he's talking, I think it's either to Kess or to the doctor, and he starts coughing up, and he's pulling something out of his mouth, and he actually ripped out his own tongue. And he shows them the tongue. He looks at them and then he starts laughing. And it's the freakiest, most disgusting, one of the most nastiest things I've seen in any of Star Trek history. Because he was like proud of it, holding on to it. And then he kind of de-evolves even more and more into the more closer to the salamander thing we see. And it just looks like a typical Star Trek alien with, like ridges of the day, basically. But it's as he's in sick bay and he's starting to change and he rips that damn tongue out of his mouth, man. That is so disgusting. To this day, I was in ninth grade when that episode premiered, and I remember to this day how it grossed me out then. I can't even watch it now. I mean, I was looking for pictures of it on TrekCore to put in my YouTube show, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to look at this for too long. But that was gross. That was horrible. So kudos to them. The episode was bizarre, but it was, I mean, the makeup in it was top notch.
Yeah, I know that gets a lot of hate, but that's yeah. But like you said, there are still some fans who really appreciate it, and it makes you wonder if that Easter egg in the game was from somebody who appreciates the episode or hates on it.
Exactly. I just think it's kind of funny that Admiral Janeway in the game would actually think about that so much that she would have had a crocheted version of what she turned into in her quarters. That's wild.
I mean, sometimes the best way to deal with trauma is to, have a constant reminder of it.
Exactly. So I think that was really cool. So that's my number 4 of the freakish and grotesque Star Trek moments.
On that note, it's time for my number 4 scary moment from Star Wars. The one that I picked for number 4 is, if you remember from the second season of The Mandalorian, it was Chapter 10 called The Passenger. If the name of the episode doesn't ring a bell, it's that second episode from season 2. Mando and Grogu are, they have to pick up Frog Lady and they have to get her eggs to the planet, the only planet in the system that habitable for them to raise their family. So Mando, Grogu, and Frog Lady, they're involved in a little skirmish with 2 X-Wings, and they crash land on that little icy planet and kind of get waylaid on their way to the planet. So they crash land on the ice planet and they're exploring the cave, and Mando and Frog Lady are trying to get to that hot spring inside the cave so that she can warm up her eggs. But Grogu decides he's going to wander, and he stumbles across all those eggs. Kind of reminds you a lot of something from Alien. You think, oh, is there going to be a face hugger burst out of one of these eggs and attach itself to Grogu? But no, there was even worse. They were spiders. So I'm not personally a fan of spiders myself, and it doesn't sound like you are, Chris, either.
No. After snakes, they're my number 2 things I loathe the most.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And, kudos to Star Wars for joining the gigantic spider craze that other pop culture properties have done, such as Lord of the Rings and the Harry Potter series.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars had to take its shot and produce an arachnophobia-inducing episode of The Mandalorian. So, yeah, very common source of terror, spiders.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't this the episode also where Grogu was eating the eggs?
Yes.
Okay, that's where I thought you were going with this at first.
Hey, you know what? That did kind of break the internet for a while, right?
It sure did.
So I didn't mention that just because I knew that was a lot of people on Twitter and stuff were really upset with that scene.
Mm-hmm. So, I gotcha.
Yeah, I didn't really want to bring that up, but hey, here we are. It's been 2 years. It's been 2 years. Deal with it.
Exactly. All right, cool. Well, that was a good one to bring up, definitely. All right, so coming in at number 3 for my Star Trek grotesque moments, I'm actually moving into modern Star Trek now and going into the first season of Star Trek Picard. I believe it was episode 5, Stardust City Rag. So this is the episode where Picard and the crew go to, I forget what it was called. Was it Freeform or Free Cloud? I think it was Free Cloud. They were looking for Dr. Bruce Maddox in the episode. But the episode started out very dark and ended very dark. If everybody remembers, and this was a controversial moment in the Star Trek fandom, was the character of Icheb from Voyager. The episode started with him being disconnected and basically disemboweled from his Borg nanoprobes and body parts while he was conscious. I guess it was some lady, I can't remember her name, but I guess there was a black market after Voyager came home for Borg body parts. And so Icheb was caught and his body parts were being harvested. 7 of 9 came in and stopped the situation from happening. I guess she shot a bunch of people dead, but Icheb ended up dying in her arms. And to her, Icheb was like her son. You remember in season 6 of Voyager, there were There were 4 Borg children. There was a baby that kind of disappeared too. And, but anyway, we won't talk about that. But 3 of them ended up getting brought back to their home world or whatever, but Icheb stayed on board the ship. So he was basically her son for a number of years. And to watch him being brutalized and tortured, and then he died in her hands. She killed him basically to save him from suffering. At this point, so that's very hard to see. And the scenes where his Borg eyeball is literally being ripped out of his head, it's gross. It's very graphic and disturbing, especially if you grew up watching Voyager and knowing that that's Icheb being tortured. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I know that with the Star Trek shows on Paramount Plus, they are unafraid to utilize their ability to kind of go off the rails and be a little bit more grotesque with the body horror and stuff like that. They certainly took every advantage of the fact that they're not on traditional television.
Definitely
to portray that scene.
Yeah, so it's one that a lot of fans have been, even to this day, still bring up and are pretty disturbed, but it was a good episode. Won't deny that. It definitely tugged at the heartstrings.
Yeah. That's a little bit sad, a little bit grotesque. Yeah, and unfortunately not the best closure for that character in that relationship. But
no, the only good thing about the episode, really the best thing about the episode, is that it introduced 7 and 9 back into the fold of Star Trek, and we still have her, so we're blessed that way.
Very much, very much. All right, time for my number 3. If you remember, back in 2016, we were treated to Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which was the first standalone Star Wars film that we got outside of the Skywalker saga. And a lot of people feel that this is the best Star Wars movie under the Disney leadership. And, I don't know if I necessarily agree, but hey, whatever you like, that there's plenty of Star Wars out there for you. But there is a very, very gruesome and disturbing scene towards the end of that movie. And I think you probably know where I'm going with this, Chris.
Oh, yes.
And that is the menacing Darth Vader in the hallway scene from Rogue One. I mean, very, very classic horror tropes there. What's more scary than a dark, dimly lit hallway with someone chasing you and trying to end your life, right? Now give Darth Vader a lightsaber and making his eerie glow of his red lightsaber be the main source of light during that whole scene. I mean, the cinematography, the way everything was shot, just seeing Vader go full on Vader, this is really the first major time we've seen Vader really exercise his dark side powers to the extreme. I mean, just no matter where he goes, death and destruction follow. But yeah, it's a very scary scene and one that I will never forget.
We finally got to see the true power of Darth Vader. I mean, we've always seen him do like slow fighting in the different movies. This one, he was like full force, hardcore Sith, and there was no mercy, no nothing.
Right. And the only thing to really top that so far that we've seen in live action is the Obi-Wan and Vader fight in the Obi-Wan series. Well, both fights, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, definitely the last one was more intense, but because Obi-Wan wasn't as up to par as he was in that third episode, but they were both wonderful. And it's nice that we're finally getting to see Darth Vader actually in his prime. That's what fans love so much. And you're right. That's what they remember most about Rogue One. Go
ahead, Chris. Give us your number 2.
All right. My number 2, we're going to switch into the movies here for a minute. And since it's the 40th anniversary of Star Trek II, I'll go ahead and talk about its grotesque moments. So there were actually a couple in this one. So obviously we know that Khan tortured Chekhov and Captain Terrell with the SETI eels. So the very first time I ever watched this Star Trek II, I watched the TV version that was aired on ABC, and they limited how grotesque some of it was. So when I first saw the SETI eel entering their ears from the theatrical version, I was like, what the heck am I watching here? Literally watching it enter and slither into their ear canal was, when you're 8 years old, was just like the height of freakiness. That was like Walking Dead mumbo jumbo at that time. Seriously, for me, so that's gross. And then watching it later on when it was coming out of Chekhov, when they were on Regula, and in the TV version, they just saw it from a distance coming out, just a little bit of blood trickling. Not in the theatrical version, when it's literally blood's dripping out, and then you see it coming out, like, right, they zoomed in on his ear and watched it slithering out. gross as all get out. Yeah, that's disgusting. But it looked great, and it made for extra attention with those scenes. Also, one of the grotesque scenes is watching Scotty carrying his burned nephew in the turbo lift, and you see him later on in sickbay dying.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard to watch. Watching a young man who was serving and stayed at his post die for nothing. You know what I mean? Because of Khan's vengeance. He wasn't even a part of it. So that was pretty gross. And then also talking about people who were burned. If you guys watch the Battle of the Mutara Nebula at the end of the movie, and Khan is caught in an explosion as the Reliance being left for dead, basically. Mm-hmm. His whole left side of or right side of his body actually is burned. Right. And he's crippled. You can even see his hands are all curled up and gnarled from the explosion, and just his chest head looked like it. You could see the melted flesh. I mean, it was gross. But I mean, it tied in very well because Khan was talking a lot. Was using, I can't remember exactly what he was talking about. Was there lines from Dante's Inferno saying something like, "From hell's heart I stab at thee"?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. I mean, creepy stuff, and it fit Khan to a T. And I'll be, so I mean, yes, it had its horrible, grotesque moments, but those were part of what made the movie so good and made the character of Khan so fascinating. Knowing the kind of lengths and the disgusting things that he would do to get his revenge. And it was seen well throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So kudos to them.
Right,
so,
and that whole movie just gave fans a whole new thing to clamor over. I mean, after the commercial failure, no, let me take that back. Star Trek: The Motion Picture was a commercial success, I think, but it just didn't get the good reviews. And Star Trek 2 really brought Star Trek not only into the consciousness of the fans and restore confidence that, hey, Star Trek can make a great feature film. It brought in new fans as well.
Exactly. Yeah, Star Trek 2 definitely saved the franchise. So, wonderful movie. I'm sorry I wasn't able to see it on the big screen for the 40th anniversary this year. I'm pissed about that, but eventually it'll come back out, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe, hey, we've got a 50th anniversary coming up, right? In about 10 years, so.
Exactly. Heck, even for the 45th, they might bring it back. You never know.
True. I mean, yeah, why not, right?
Exactly. We're in that era now. I've seen Star Trek: The Motion Picture on the big screen twice since they re-released it. So, not as exciting as Star Trek 2, but hey, it was fun to go and see it on the big screen.
Exactly, and there's no better way to see that movie than on the biggest screen possible. So.
Oh, I know, absolutely, yes, sir.
All right, I guess it's time for my number 2. We're going to stick with the body horror subgenre here. I chose a very early episode of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, an episode from season 2. I believe it was episode 8. It was kind of the middle piece of a 3-episode arc. In the first episode of the arc, we saw some dead Geonosians brought back to life, and they kind of terrorized the clones. But they were able to successfully capture one of the leaders of the Geonosians, and they were transporting him back to Coruscant to stand trial. But some things happen, and these slug-like brain and slug-like worm-like thing burrowed itself into, or rather up the nose of one of the clone troopers, and started taking over his consciousness and his actions and everything. He infected a bunch of his other squad mates with these slug-like creatures, and they kind of took over the piloting of the ship, and it was up to Padawans Ahsoka Tano and Barriss Offee to kind of figure out what was going on and try to save as many of these clones as they could, because they knew they weren't acting right. But yeah, just the idea of some kind of like worm-like, slug-like creature crawling up your nose and just attaching itself to your brain is just... Ugh.
Oh, I know that just the image of it, and just thinking of like going one nostril, like looping around the brain, and maybe out another. Oh, I forgot all about that episode, man. Thanks for bringing that up.
I'm welcome, I think.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm going to have to watch it again. It's that time of year. Why not?
Yep.
But you're right, and it kind of, in a way, they kind of recreated that during Book of Boba Fett too. And it wasn't in the second or third episode. Didn't a lizard go up Boba's nose? And cause him to hallucinate. So Yeah, so Dave Filoni must have some sort of like thing with things going up people's noses or something. I don't know, man. That's some gross stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Without further ado, we have reached the number one scary moment in Star Trek. Chris, take it away.
Alrighty, so I am going to the early years of Next Generation, the end of season 1. The episode is called Conspiracy. So this is the episode where there's apparently some sort of invasion of the Federation going on, but we don't know what's happening throughout most of the episode. Toward the later part of the episode, we find out that they're these little, like, insect-like little crawly creatures. What they do is they enter a humanoid host, and they stick their little, like a little pointer out for breathing, and they cause the people to eat worms as what they feed off of. But basically, those little creatures used our humanoid bodies to start taking over strategic areas of Federation space, and eventually it would be the Federation. So anyway, Picard and Riker figure this out, and they go and they find the mother creature, who is actually in Lieutenant Commander Remick. Yeah, and so they find him actually sending some sort of signal out, and he turns away, and there's a little creature that just ran out of one of the Admiral's bodies. And in one of the most grotesque moments in all of Star Trek, Remick eats that creature. They watch him swallow it, and they had this effect where they had his throat throbbing. And so, yeah, it was gross, man. So Picard and Riker actually phaser Remick, but then for some reason they bring their phasers up to his head, and his head explodes right on screen. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, meat got the flying all over the place. It was just nasty, And then that's not where they stopped. So
No,
after
of course
the head blows up, his stomach starts to dissolve, and then all of a sudden something comes rising out of his chest. You see all these little bug creatures flying out, and then you got this mother creature that is one of the most disgusting, nauseating looking things you could ever see. And it was groaning, and so Picard and Riker said, well, forget this, so we're going to kill it. So they killed it, and all you see at the end of the episode before they go back to the Enterprise is a body with a burned out abdomen, guts everywhere, and a body with no head, and head parts blown all over the room. I mean, think about it. This episode aired in what, May or June of 1988. I mean,
yeah.
I can't believe they got that past the censors. Even though the show was in first run syndication and not network, I just can't believe for that era they would do something that visually violent.
Yeah, that seems very odd for that time of year. I mean, that's before television ratings, of course.
Yes.
But, television tended to stick less to like grotesque stuff and more, doom and foreboding and, building atmosphere when they wanted to portray something creepy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the episode actually had both. It had the doom and foreboding of what was going on with the Federation and this head blowing up. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they went full whammy on this one.
It wasn't that great of an episode overall, but I at least I give them credit for attempting something that visually striking.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then it's still, how many years now? 35 years, 34 years since it came out, and people are still talking about that scene. I see memes of it on Twitter all the time, for different things. So, when you have something, even if it wasn't a greatest episode, it sticks out like that, you have a classic to some degree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, we're almost at the end, aren't we?
We are.
All right. Well, I guess it's time for my number one scary moment from Star Wars. So, all right, going to take you back to 2010 and 2012, respectively. I had graduated college, I was working, and this was, right before the purchase of Lucasfilm by Disney. We got a duology of books. So the first book that was released in 2010 was called Death Troopers. And these are not to be confused with the Death Troopers from Rogue One and the shiny black armor that speak their own weird language. We're talking Death Troopers as in The Walking Dead, the reanimated dead. And then in 2012, a prequel novel to Death Troopers was released called Red Harvest. So this duology of books that is now firmly considered legends was still, and still is to this day, one of my favorite sets of stories to read. It's a little bit of Star Wars mixed with a very healthy dose of Resident Evil and a sprinkling of The Walking Dead, because they're zombies. So in the Red Harvest book, this takes place during the era of the Old Republic, when it was the Jedi versus the Sith race, not to be confused with the Sith that we see in the classic trilogy era. This was a race of people called the Sith. So a flesh-eating virus is created from a very rare type of orchid. This orchid gets stolen by one of the Sith Lords, and he finds that the orchid is able to produce this virus that not only kills its test subject, but then later reanimates them and brings them back to life as a zombie. So the Sith Lord creates this zombie army and uses it to attack the Jedi. He ultimately fails, but we find out at the end of the book that obviously, since it's a prequel and that we know what happens in Death Troopers, we know that this virus survives. So Death Troopers is very much evocative of Alien. A group of Imperials come across a derelict Star Destroyer that has been overrun by these reanimated stormtroopers from the virus that was created in the first book. So, like I said, it takes cues from Aliens as well as the zombies subgenre. It's a really tense thriller, and I recommend anyone to read this book if you like a little bit of zombie horror in your Star Wars. It's a really good duology of books.
Oh, that sounds awesome. That's awesome. You said they came out in 2012?
The first one came out in 2010, and that was Death Troopers.
Okay.
And then in 2012, the prequel book, Red Harvest, was released. But it's a prequel in the sense that it takes place thousands of years prior to Death Troopers. But it's still the same author wrote both books, and it's the same virus in both.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of either one of them, so I'll look into that and see. I mean, those sound like some pretty good reads. So you said the Stormtroopers are in the first one, right?
No, there's no Stormtrooper. Well, in the prequel novel, there are no Stormtroopers.
Okay.
It's the Sith versus the Jedi.
Okay.
In the second book, the one that the one that was released first but takes place chronologically after. That involves the Empire and Stormtroopers. The time frame or the timeline on that book is right around the time of A New Hope.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think I'll look in the library and see, check them out. That might be an interesting read.
Yeah, you should easily be able to find both books at your local library.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So you're the aficionado on the Star Wars novels. I never got to read any of them, so... So you're a fountain of information for those, my friend. You really are.
I try.
Yes, you do.
No, I'm a huge fan. I mean, of all the Legends books that I read, I think that is my favorite duology, and that's saying a lot, considering that we had the Thrawn trilogy, the Hand of Thrawn duology. Both of those are incredible narrative storytelling in Star Wars, and I still think that Red Harvest and Death Troopers is better.
Oh, okay, cool, awesome.
All right, so hey, that's going to do it for our top 5 scary moments from Star Trek and Star Wars. Why don't you tell us what you think? You can reach out to the show on Twitter at CLLPod. You can email us at logslightsaberspod@gmail.com, or you can engage with the post on Facebook or Twitter that will announce the episode. Engage with us there and tell us what your favorite scary moments from Star Trek and Star Wars are, and we'll read them out loud on the air.
Awesome. Sounds good to me.
All right. And if you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more and you want to introduce your friends to it, please feel free to share our podcast. If you'd like, please rate us on Spotify and give us a rating and review on iTunes. That is how we beat the algorithm and get our voices in more ears. So please give us a review, help us grow the show, because I know we have some very fierce and loyal fans. I want to get more.
Definitely. Yeah, the more the merrier, definitely. Be great to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Chris, tell everybody where they can reach you.
Well, you can follow me. The best way to reach me is through email. It's Christopher, and then my last name, STOUGH, and then the letters LSW gmail.com. Also, if you're interested in watching any of my videos on YouTube that deal about Star Trek and different episodes, different topics, you can just go to youtube.com, type in Pittsburgh's Trek Chat, and you can check or go right to my page, or my channel, I should say. And there are 80 episodes up there. If there's anything you guys want to look at, and if you ever want to bring it up about anything, let me know.
All right. Hey, that's going to do it for episode 19 of Captain's Logs and Lightsabers. We hope you enjoyed this special Halloween-themed episode, and we look forward to coming back for episode 20. Until then, may that force be with you.
And live long and prosper.